The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while I was pouring my morning coffee. I glanced at the screen. My son's name. For a second, I thought about ignoring it. Dad. His voice was flat, controlled, the tone he uses when he's already made up his mind. I need you to know I filed the paperwork yesterday. The property is in my name now, the accounts too. Mom signed everything over before she passed. You get nothing. Don't bother coming to the reading. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, because my wife was sitting right there at the breakfast table, both hands wrapped around her mug, very much alive, watching me with raised eyebrows as if to say, "Was that him again?" I nodded. She shook her head slowly and went back to her coffee. We had been waiting for that call for 11 months. Let me rewind. None of this makes sense without understanding who my son became, and how far back that story really goes. My wife and I built everything we have with our own hands. I worked 31 years as a civil engineer. She taught 4th grade for 26. We weren't wealthy by any dramatic measure, but we were careful. We paid off our home in rural Tennessee, 12 acres outside of Cookeville, a house I built with my own father's help in 1987, a small cattle operation we ran on weekends, a pond stocked with bass, 2 truck gardens. It was ours, every inch of it. We have 2 children. Our daughter lives in Asheville and calls every Sunday without fail. Then there's our son. I'll call him by his name, Derek, because giving him something softer feels dishonest at this point. Derek was always the one who calculated. Even as a boy, he would watch, wait, figure out the angle before he moved. I used to think it was intelligence. His mother thought he was just thoughtful. We were both wrong about what we were actually seeing. He moved back to Cookeville 4 years ago after his second divorce. He said he needed to reset. He said being close to family would help him get his head straight. My wife made up the guest room. I stocked the second fridge in the garage with the beer he liked. We were glad to have him. For the first few months it was fine. He helped around the property. He was present at dinner. He asked about our finances in a way that seemed like concern. How were the retirement accounts doing? Had we thought about updating the will? Did we have a plan if one of us got sick? I answered honestly because he was my son, and I had no reason not to. I told him we had a modest IRA, the property valued around $380,000 at current market, a joint savings account, and a life insurance policy. I told him our will was straightforward, split equally between him and his sister, with the land going to whoever wanted to keep it, and if neither did, it would be sold and divided. He nodded and didn't bring it up again. Not for a while. The shift was gradual. Derek started joining me on errands I used to run alone. He began driving my wife to her doctor appointments. She had been managing some early-stage heart arrhythmia, nothing severe, but enough to need monitoring. He said it was easier if he drove. She said it was sweet. I appreciated it. Then he started coming into the appointments himself, sitting in the room, asking the cardiologist questions. That too seemed caring at first. It was my daughter who first said something. She came down for Thanksgiving and pulled me aside after dinner, when Derek had gone out to the barn with her husband to look at the tractor. "Dad," she said, keeping her voice low, "has Derek talked to you about anything financially?" I told her about our conversation from the fall. Her face didn't change much, but her jaw tightened. "He called me in September," she said. "He told me that you and Mom were starting to struggle, that Mom's health was getting worse than you were letting on. He suggested that maybe I should let him handle things going forward because I was too far away to be practical." I stood there in my own kitchen and felt something cold move through me. "What did you say?" "I told him to mind his own business," she said. "But Dad, just be careful." I thanked her and told her not to worry. But I was already worrying. I didn't confront Derek immediately. I've learned in 63 years that confronting someone before you understand what they're actually doing is how you lose. You tip them off. They adjust. You're left holding nothing but your own suspicion, and a relationship that's now poisoned and defensive. So I watched instead. Over the next 6 weeks, I noticed things I had previously explained away. Derek had begun intercepting the mail before I came down the driveway. He was often on the phone in the barn and went quiet when I approached. He had started having long conversations with my wife during her afternoon rest, conversations that ended abruptly when I came upstairs. My wife and I have been married for 39 years. We don't keep secrets from each other. So one evening I asked her directly what she and Derek talked about. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He keeps asking me to think about what happens to me if you go first. He says the property would be too much for me to manage. He says it would make more sense to put it in his name now as a caretaker arrangement, so there's no probate delay if something happens." She looked at me steadily. "I told him I'd discuss it with you." "What did he say?" "He said not to burden you with it, that you had enough to worry about with your back." I sat with that for a long moment. Then I called my daughter and asked for the name of her attorney. Her attorney was a woman named Margaret Chen, based out of Nashville, practicing estate law for 22 years. I drove down on a Tuesday without telling Derek where I was going. I told him I had a follow-up with my orthopedic specialist. I laid out everything for Margaret. The conversations, the mail interception, my son's approach to my wife about the caretaker arrangement, his sudden involvement in medical appointments. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "What you're describing has a name. It's called undue influence. In Tennessee, it's one of the most common forms of elder financial abuse, and it's significantly underreported because it comes from family members the victim trusts." She also said this, "The fact that you're here before anything has been signed is the most important thing. Document everything going forward, every conversation, every request, dates, times, what was said, and don't change your behavior toward him, not yet." She helped me set up a revocable living trust that same week, an arrangement that placed the property, the accounts, and all major assets into a trust with myself and my wife as trustees and our daughter as successor trustee. It was ironclad. Nothing could be transferred, signed over, or modified without both our signatures and a mandatory 72-hour review period. Derek didn't know any of this existed. Margaret also connected me with an elder law advocate named Thomas Brewer, who advised us on a second layer of protection, a durable power of attorney for healthcare that explicitly named my daughter, not Derek, as my wife's medical decision-maker if she became incapacitated. We had this notarized and filed with her cardiologist's office, her hospital records, and the county clerk. I drove home that afternoon feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Steady. The next phase was the hardest, because it required me to keep sitting at the dinner table with my son every evening and behaving as though nothing had changed. He escalated through the winter. In January, he brought home a stack of documents he said he'd had prepared by a friend who does this kind of paperwork. He presented them to my wife while I was out checking the fence line. She texted me immediately, and I came back to the house to find him at the kitchen table with a notary he had apparently arranged to come to the property. I walked in. Derek looked up for just a moment. I saw something in his face. Calculation quickly smoothed over into warmth. "Dad, I was just walking Mom through some planning documents. Routine stuff. Nothing to worry about." I sat down across from him. I looked at the papers. They were a quitclaim deed for the property and a durable financial power of attorney, both naming Derek as sole agent. I looked at the notary, a young man who seemed uncomfortable. I said, "You can go. We won't be needing you today." Derek said, "Dad, let's discuss this as a family." I said, "With our attorney present. That's not a debate." He left the table. That night, I recorded the date, time, and what had occurred, and sent the written account to Margaret Chen by email. She flagged it and said we now had documented evidence of a coercive attempt. In March, my wife was admitted to the hospital for 2 nights following an arrhythmia episode. Nothing life-threatening, but frightening in the moment. Derek drove her to the ER, which I did not object to. But when I arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later, A nurse told me that my son had already spoken with the attending cardiologist and had represented himself as having medical power of attorney. I showed the hospital the actual POA document, the one filed 3 months earlier, naming our daughter. The hospital administrator pulled Derek into a separate room. I don't know exactly what was said, but when he came out, he would not look at me. My wife came home 2 days later. She was tired, but she was sharp. In the car on the way home, she said quietly, "He told the nurse I had dementia." I kept my eyes on the road. "Did you hear me?" she said. "I heard you," I said, "and I have it in writing." Margaret Chen contacted the Tennessee Adult Protective Services office in April with our documentation. 11 months of written logs, the hospital incident report, copies of the quitclaim deed Derek had attempted to have signed, and a recorded statement from my wife. APS opened a formal investigation. We did not tell Derek. He continued living in the guest room. He continued joining us for dinner. He continued occasionally making indirect references to the future, to how hard it would be to manage the property, to how much simpler things would be with a clear plan. I continued listening and saying little. In May, Derek told us he was going into Cookville for the weekend to visit an old friend. He kissed my wife on the cheek at the door. He shook my hand. 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, Margaret told me that APS had concluded their investigation and referred the case to the district attorney's office. The charges filed included financial exploitation of an elderly or vulnerable adult and filing fraudulent legal documents. The notarized quitclaim deed had, it turned out, been submitted to the county recorder's office without our knowledge or consent. Derek had found a different notary. The sheriff's department contacted me that afternoon. They asked me not to reach out to Derek. On Sunday morning, his phone went to voicemail. On Monday morning, the same. On Tuesday, my phone rang. It was Derek. "Dad." His voice was that flat, controlled tone again. "I need you to know something. I filed all the paperwork. The property is in my name. Mom signed everything. You get nothing out of this. The attorney confirmed it this morning. Don't bother." "Son," I said. He stopped. "Your mother is sitting right here next to me at the breakfast table." She said, "Good morning." A long silence. "The trust has been in place for 11 months, I said. "Nothing you filed is valid. Margaret Chen has copies of everything, and so does the district attorney's office in Putnam County. I think you're going to want to call a lawyer, a good one, today." I heard him breathe. Then I heard the call end. My wife reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The legal process took another 4 months to work through. Derek retained a defense attorney. The fraudulent deed filing was the most serious charge, a Class C felony in Tennessee, carrying 2 to 10 years. The financial exploitation charge added additional exposure. His attorney negotiated a plea arrangement, 3 years of supervised probation, mandatory repayment of legal costs incurred in unwinding the fraudulent filing, and a permanent injunction barring him from any involvement in our financial or medical affairs. He was not imprisoned. I'll be honest about how I feel about that. I don't know. Some mornings I think the outcome was just. Some mornings I think about the notary he hired, and the hospital nurse he lied to, and the 11 months my wife and I spent being careful at our own dinner table. And I'm not sure justice is the right word for what we got. What I know is this: the property is ours. My wife's healthcare decisions are in the hands of someone who loves her. Our daughter drove down from Asheville the weekend after the plea was entered, and we sat on the back porch until midnight, the 3 of us, listening to the frogs at the pond. And it felt, for the first time in almost a year, like our home again. Derek has not contacted us. I don't know if he will. My daughter asked me one evening, quietly, whether I was angry. I thought about it for a while before I answered. "I was afraid," I said finally. For a long time, I was just afraid. Afraid of what he was becoming. Afraid of what I might have missed earlier. Afraid of what it meant about me as a father that I didn't see it sooner. She was quiet. The anger came later, I said. But I didn't let it drive. The documentation drove. The attorney drove. The process drove. I just had to stay steady long enough to let it work. She nodded. Then she said, "You did the right thing, Dad." I know that. But here is what I've carried since this ended, and why I'm telling this story to anyone who will listen. What Derek did to us has a name. It is elder financial abuse. It happens in houses that look exactly like ours. Quiet, modest, ordinary houses where someone who knows you well has decided that your trust is the most exploitable thing about you. If someone in your family has started asking questions about your finances that feel slightly off, if they've begun inserting themselves into your medical appointments, if they suggest gently and repeatedly that things would be simpler with them in charge, please hear me. You are not being paranoid. You are being observed. Document everything. Put dates on paper. Call an estate attorney before anyone asks you to sign anything. Make sure the people named on your healthcare and financial powers of attorney are the ones you would choose in your clearest, most awake moment, not the ones who volunteered for the job. The property is still here. The pond is still full. My wife and I had coffee on the back porch this morning and watched the light come up over the east field, and we did not speak for a long time because there was nothing that needed saying. I am 63 years old. I am not wealthy, but I have what I built, and I have who I love, and I made sure, quietly, carefully, one document at a time, that no one could take either of those things from me. That is enough. That is more than enough.